And we're live. Well, welcome back to the Bells Club podcast. I'm your host, David Bell. And on today's episode, we'll be taking a look at round 17 of the 2025 Formula One World Championship, with this week's Grand Prix being held at the Baku City Circuit in Azerbaijan. So let's get ready for those 5 green lights, and we'll be underway. So now we're going to have a look at FP1. So the big news, or the big story from this week, is that if McLaren have a 1-2 or a 1-3 finish this weekend, they actually win the Constructors' Championship, with 7 races and even 3 sprint races still to go. Some of the big rumours, or kind of the biggest talking points for the first practice session, or during the first practice session, was around who is going to take the second Red Bull seat in 2026. Now, if it's going to be Yuki, if it's going to be Hadjar or Arvid Lindblad, whose name was actually kind of thrown into the mix, but Yuki and Hadjar have both said during the kind of their own interviews that the rumours are just rumours. You know, nothing's confirmed, nothing's set in stone, contracts haven't been signed. So they're kind of just playing down the kind of rumours at the moment. And they actually said we're going to find out soon, or we probably will find out soon, who's going to be racing beside Max Verstappen in Red Bull in 2026. Now, a red flag was waved as Sainz exited turn 16 and drove over the curbing. And now it looked like the kind of adhesive, sticky back kind of rubber that sticks the curbing to the ground, or to the tarmac, actually came up or was sticking out of the curbing, which a marshal had to go onto the track, versus like the reason why the red flag was waved. So the marshal could actually remove that piece of plastic before it interfered with another driver. Now, it was at the end of the FP1 session where we saw our first 3 fastest drivers. Those were Norris in P1, Piastri in P2, then Leclerc in P3. Now, moving on to Saturday for Q1. So at around the 11-minute mark, the first red flag was waved as Alex Albon turned into turn 1 and actually made contact with the barrier, which broke his left wheel / left suspension, which ended his session and dropped him immediately to P20. At, say, 1 minute 36 seconds left, the second red flag was waved as Nico Hülkenberg also made contact with the barrier, but luckily he only smashed up his front wing by locking up his wheels, and he did manage to limp back to the pits to get his front wing changed, but unfortunately it still really didn't make a difference, and he did kind of was out in Q1. Now, for the session, our third red flag was waved just as its kind of time ran out, because Gasly took to the escape road, but Gasly wasn't the cause of the red flag, because literally seconds later at the same corner, Colapinto crashed into the barriers by having a massive tank slapper, and he actually lost control of his car because of it and hit the barrier. Now, at the end of Q1, we did lose our first 5 drivers, and those were Colapinto, Hülkenberg, Ocon, Gasly, and Albon. Now, into Q2. So at 11 minutes 54 of Q2, we saw our 4th red flag being waved, and this time it was over Ollie Berman as he exited turn 2. He applied power and kind of hit the throttle, but he did end up losing the rear of his car, which his back wheel actually made contact with the barrier and broke. Now, I say his rear wheel hit it. Well, obviously his rear wheel hit the barrier, but it wasn't his wheel that actually broke. It was kind of suspension components and kind of the wish arm, and possibly the wheel a bit broke, kind of probably came off the rim a little bit, but the actual, the rim, wheel rim, whatever the tire sits on, the wheel, if that makes sense, didn't break. It was like it's suspension broke, basically. Now, at the end of this qualifying session, which was one of the quieter sessions of the weekend so far, we did lose our final 5 drivers. Those were Alonso, Hamilton, Bortoleto, Stroll, and then Berman. Now, moving on to Q3 now. So within, say, 7 minutes, 7 seconds left of Q3, we saw our 5th red flag being waved But this one was for Charles Leclerc, as he ended up burying his Ferrari into the wall at turn 15. Now, from the broadcast and onboard cameras, it looks like he just carried way too much speed into the corner and experienced massive understeer, which ended up planting him like head on straight into the barriers. You could argue it was like as I am stupid kind of situation, but that did end Ferrari's qualifying sessions then and there. Then on the 3-minute 41-second mark, we saw our 6th and final red flag being waved. Now, this red flag being waved makes this qualifying session in general the biggest session in Formula One history, with the most red flags ever waved. But this time, this red flag was waved for our championship leader, Oscar Piastri, as he did unfortunately crash his car into the barriers at turn 3. Now, it looked like it was similar to what happened to Leclerc's crash, where he carried too much speed into the corners and actually couldn't make the turn, and unfortunately crashed into the barriers. Then, at the end of Q3, Max Verstappen, for the first time in Baku, takes pole position. Now, he is followed on the front rows by 2 unlikely contendants, with Sainz in P2 and Lawson in P3. Then he's followed up also by Antonelli in P4. Then, while we were waiting for the actual race to start, while the cars were kind of being brought to the grid and the technicians or the mechanics were kind of working on the cars, we actually found out that Ocon had been disqualified from qualifying because of his car failed a technical inspection, but mainly around his rear wing and the actual deflection of the rear wing, or basically how much give or bend the actual rear wing is allowed to have. Now, when the race actually did get started, it looked like everybody got away quite well and clean, except for our championship leader, Piastri, who unfortunately did drop down into P20. Then, on turn, say, 5 or 6, he did again crash into the barriers, where he had a massive lockup, which in doing so just instantly ended McLaren's hopes of securing the championship, or the Constructors' Championship, this weekend. Now, later, after the crash and kind of as the race got underway again, it was noted that Piastri did jump the start of the race, which was the cause of him dropping down to P20, because he kind of jumped the start, stopped. When he stopped, everybody else went, and then he actually went into like anti-stall, or he just had a late start, and he dropped him back to P20. But because of his jump start, he wasn't the only person who jump started the start of the race. Alonso did the exact same thing because he was positioned behind Piastri, and he actually moved because Piastri moved. So it was almost like Piastri kind of faked him out a little bit. And it was actually noted on the radio, or Alonso said on the radio, he reacted because Piastri moved, which is kind of funny because he was looking at the car in front, not the lights. But I guess that's just how Alonso races. But at the end, Alonso was given a 5-second penalty because of his jump start. Now, that brings us to the end of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. And as surprise, surprise, Max Verstappen wins in Baku. Now, he is followed up on the podium by Russell in P2. And for the best race finish this year, for not only himself and Williams, but frankly, the best race finish in over 10 years, Sainz finished in P3. And now, that will do us for this week's episode of the Bells Club podcast. I want to thank you all for listening to this week's episode. If you feel like you've enjoyed, please feel free to follow us here on wherever you get your podcasts. And I look forward to talking to you all next week for round 18 or the Singapore Grand Prix. Goodbye, everybody.